Hello and welcome. It's good to be with you all today. We are excited to bring this session on EDFacts Modernization to you. We have some significant changes coming next spring on how the IDA Section 618 data are submitted to ED. And we have a great panel of folks here today to give you the most up-to-date information on the topic. Today, you'll hear from a representative from OSEP's Research to Practice Division, as well as representatives from the EDFacts Office and NCES. Additionally, we'll hear from some of our data technical assistance centers on products and tools we have available to assist with this work. Please note that there is a chat or Q&A function in this platform. So you have questions, feel free to submit them. We will respond to as many questions as we have time to today. But please note, we may need to take some questions back to OSEP or ED for further discussion and then be able to provide an answer later on. If we can go to the next slide. As a matter of introductions, the panel today consists of myself, Meredith Michelli, from the Research to Practice Division in OSEP. I work with the IDA Section 618 data, and I am the Research to Practice Data Team and 373 Technical Assistance on State Data Collection Program Area Lead. And I've been working in this position for I've been working with the 618 data for over 12 years now, probably in this position about 10. I'm joined by Kelly Worthington from the Elementary and Secondary Branch, otherwise referred to as the EDFacts Office, in the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, at ED. Kelly has a long history of working with the IDA data as she began her career at ED, working in the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning, or MSIP division in OSEP, and then moved to the position I'm currently in Research to Practice in OSEP, and then moved over to the EDFacts office and is now the branch chief for the elementary and secondary branch and oversees the EDFacts work. Additionally, we're joined by Barbara Tim, also from the elementary and secondary branch of NCES at ED. Barbara has a long history of working with the EDFacts systems and supporting states' ability to report data through these systems. She's been the technical lead on EDFacts since its inception. And I've been working with Barbara since I began here at OSEP. And so she also has a long history of supporting the submission and collection of the IDA Section 618 data via EDFacts. Finally, we will also have 3 short videos where Rachel Wilkinson from the IDA Data Center, or IDC, Bill Hennekins from the Center for the Integration of IDA Data, or CID, and Robin Nelson from the Center of IDA Early Childhood Data Systems, or DAISY, will present on tools and products that will help states with the transition and meeting the new expectations of EDFacts modernization. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll move on to the next slide. To begin, I just wanted to give an update on the IDA Section 618 data in general, including the EDFacts information collection package for the Part B 618 data, and as well as at least one of the changes that we'll be implementing next year for the Part C 618 data as well. Kelly and Barb will provide an overview of the EDFacts modernization work. I'll follow up Kelly and Barbara's presentation with how the modernization will impact the submission of the 618 data specifically. And finally, we'll wrap up with those 3 videos from the Data Technical Assistance Centers. Next slide. So due to recent approvals, these next few slides are a bit out of date. We now have an approved EDFacts information collection package for SY 20, 22, 23, 23, 24, and 24, 25. The approved package includes many of the same changes that were in the 30-day, were proposed in the 30-day public comment period and are shown on these slides. So they're still relevant, but now it is approved opposed to being proposed. Based on the recently approved package, we'll be implementing the following changes to the 618 data collections. Most of these will go into effect with the data for 2022-23 or later, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, the or later piece. One of the first changes is with our Part B personnel data collection. We've revised the age groups associated with reporting the special education teacher FTEs and the paraprofessional FTEs from the age groups of 3 to 5 and 6 to 21 to 3 to 5 not in kindergarten and ages 5 in kindergarten to 21. And so that's for EDFacts file specs 070 and 112. Those changes align our age categories with how we're now reporting the child count, Part B child count data. Next, we have the Part B maintenance of effort reduction and coordinated early intervening services data collection. OSEP has added 2 new data elements to this data collection. Those are the number of children with disabilities receiving CCEIS under IDEA in the reference period or reference year, and then the number of children without disabilities receiving CCEIS under IDEA in the reference year. This is the piece where we're implementing a year delay to implementing these data elements. So instead of hitting with the 22-23 data, it will hit with the 23-24 MOE CIS data. Next slide. So with the assessment data collection, OSEP has revised the data collection to include participation and performance data on children with disabilities disaggregated by major racial ethnic groups. We will not be collecting IDEA assessment data by disability category, which had been proposed in earlier versions of this package. Based on feedback, we also withdrew our proposal to split the IDEA state supplemental survey into 2 surveys. Instead, we will continue to maintain a single annual IDEA metadata survey. You all will be receiving an email noting these upcoming changes to the Part B Section 618 data collections, as well as links to the EDFacts information collection package documents in the very near future. You probably have already received one, which came out directly from EDFacts or Partner Support Center, but we will send a follow-up that is specific to the 618 data in the very near future. Moving on to the next slide. Since we now have an approved package, this slide is no longer relevant, but I will take the opportunity to just quickly discuss one change for for Part C, Section 618 data that is coming with next year, I believe, next year's submission. So we're trying to get a better understanding of the data that we're receiving in the Part C exiting category of Part B eligible continuing in Part C. So in the Part C exiting data collection, states will now have to select yes or no for whether the state application for their IDEA Part C funds includes a policy in which children with disabilities who were eligible to receive services under 619 and previously received services under Part C can continue to receive services under Part C beyond age 3. So if a state selects yes to this option, then they will be expected to report counts under that category of Part B eligible continuing in Part C. If they select no, NA will automatically be filled into those cells in that data collection. And we will be implementing similar updates to Part C child count and settings data collection. So we can move on to the next slide. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kelly and Barb from the EDFacts office to provide an overview of the EDFacts modernization.
And you can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. I'm going to be taking the first couple, and Barb and I are going to kind of tag team on a couple of these. But I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It is always a treat to get to come and be with our special ed partners, and we're grateful to be here. So I'll just launch right into what we're doing. the first thing is, well, what is EDFacts? For those of you who've been around for a while, you can just tune out for the next 2 minutes and then jump back in the next slide. But as a little history, in the early 2000s, the US Department of Ed had over 10 legacy data collection systems, and it was generally one for each major grant program. We found that as we were digging into the data were duplicative, timelines were not aligned for when people were collecting data and when they needed to use data. So we had double collections. Our definitions for the same terms were inconsistent. And we got a lot of feedback from the states about the state of our operations and how we could improve it. So the concept of EDFacts was born in that time period as a centralized data collection system that took us quite a few years to get fully operational, but it was fully operational by 2010. Every state had an EDFacts coordinator that was identified, and our goal at that time was collect the data once, use it many times, and get rid of inefficiencies. So today, we collect approximately 80 files and a dozen metadata surveys that are important for us to be able to use the data that are submitted in the data files. So we, as Meredith mentioned, we have one OMB information collection package for the school age data files. And I don't mean to give slight to the infant toddler program, the Part C folks, but what I'm going to be discussing right now is primarily for the school age data collection. And we'll loop back in and talk about how Part C is impacted also. But again, the goal was standardized documents, format, instruction, communication. And that's basically, it's pretty simple. It's how can we do this as efficiently as possible? You can go to the next slide, please. So our next slide is what are the problems that we're fixing? And a couple of years ago, we realized we've got a data system that is coming close to 20 years old. And just like your 20-year-old car, you've got maintenance problems, you've got technology changes, you've got everything wearing out. We've had a really solid, strong system that operated all that time with tweaks, and we needed to make some changes. But not only were they technical changes, we also took an opportunity to say, what are the operational changes that we needed to make to support a more efficient process and system? The first part of this was about the data quality. And what happened over time was the data came in. We had a few rules that were built into the submission system to prevent errant data from entering that system. Over time, we started doing post-submission data quality checks. As the years grew, that process grew and grew and grew to the point where we have this very intensive, mostly manual, mostly post-due date process, which is for us and for the states, unsustainable, insufficient, and we truly maxed out the efficacy of what we were doing. At the beginning, there were a lot of things that were getting fixed as a result of doing that. At this point in time, we're kind of maxed out on what we can see in the data as a result of that post-submission process. So timelines were also a factor. With COVID, as I'm sure many of you, whether you're in a state, TA center, advocacy organization, everybody wants data faster. And what was acceptable in past years was no longer acceptable. So we knew the data were not usable at the due date, and that we were only able to release those data, really start using those data well, about 6 to 12 months after the due date, which was about a year after the data with which, if we were talking about assessment data, well, that was already based on a prior school year, and then it would still take us 6 to 12 months to release it. And these timelines were just no longer acceptable. So that burden that was created as a result of this post-submission data quality process that was manual, that involved a whole lot of back and forth, that was inconsistent between data programs and our state offices, we had to make change. In addition, we have a number of systems that are currently in play. We've got a metadata system, we've got a submission system, we've got notes that are going in one place, we've got, you get the idea. We have a number of different systems that require a lot of different logins, a lot of different people, a lot of maintenance that really, we don't need to have all the systems that we currently use. Data notes, inefficient data note tracking from one year to the next is probably one of the biggest complaints that we get about our data note process is that we do not carry anything over from one year to the next, and everybody's answering the same question each year. And we have to put checks and balances in place, but we're looking for more efficient ways that we can do that. So those are the problems that we are working to fix with our modernization effort. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So goals for EDFacts modernization, they're pretty simple. And the bottom line that we keep repeating over and over and over, we need data that are usable as of the due date. And what does that mean? That means we have to get rid of all of the, or the large majority of that post due date work that is currently occurring. There is no reason why we can't tell people this is the business rule that we need. If your data triggered this business rule, we either need an explanation, or you may want to go back and check your data routines, data input, something about your data that is causing this business rule to trigger. At the same time, we are looking at the business rules to say, are the business rules that we have in place, and edit checks is what we used to call them in OSEP. I'm not sure what you're currently using, but are those checks that we are doing on the data good checks, or are we triggering too many false positives? What are we finding when we hit those triggers? So from an ed side, we want to make sure we are providing tools and running processes that support the state in owning that data quality, rather than waiting for us to send back a portion of the business rule triggers, the information that gets triggered after submission, and then manually receiving back or getting resubmissions and having this months-long process after the due date. On the state side, the change is going to be, there's going to be more data quality work that occurs before the data are due to the department. And this is a conversation we're having with our EDFacts coordinators, which I know we probably have some on the line here, but the importance and the expectation and the value that we have on data governance, and making sure that our data stewards are well connected with our data submitters. And that's true in our office as well as our expectation for what's happening in your office. And I'll give a quick example. Last week, we had our data governance meeting for the department, and our data stewards were able to come and bring to the table information about data that, we're trying to figure out how to use data that was during a COVID year when there were just a lot of things that were different. How do we use the data? How should we not use the data? And can we get a standardized practice across data users? That's information that none of us on the technical side would be able to adequately describe and answer. So we have the same expectation for in the future, which we know in some places this is going well, in some places it's not. In the future, the expectation is that the EDFacts coordinators and the state subject matter experts, like the IDEA Part B data manager, would be closely aligned and coordinating on whatever data notes are submitted to the department with when the data are due. So I just wanted to make sure that emphasis comes across. I know those of you who are doing Generate already have that established. Some of you who are not doing Generate already have that established. But if you don't, we will need help in figuring out how can we make better connections there. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, Barb, I'm going to pass this to you.
Okay, so to achieve what we're going to do from an IT standpoint, we're building a new system. It's called EDPass. It will have pre-submission data quality tool. You'll use the same files that you've been submitting to our current system. You'll send them up into this EDPass system. And instead of waiting weeks to find out what the data quality results feedback was, you'll see it in the system immediately. The system will allow you to download the data quality feedback so you can have it in an Excel spreadsheet just like you have today. And then you input the results directly into EDPass, and then you submit the file and you're done. So the big piece here is that post stuff. It isn't like currently you send in the file, you wait several weeks, you get back some results from us, you respond to them and you resend them in. This is going to be put up your file, you'll get your feedback, you answer your feedback, you submit the file, and you're finished. We want to note here about Common Education Data Standards. We are using the methodologies to explain the EDFacts data group so that you can get your data sources right. As Kelly mentioned, if the data sources are right, then the file is going to be right, and that it will pass the business rules, and the whole process works pretty seamlessly. Next slide. Yeah. So what doesn't change? You're only going to submit to the department the aggregate data by the due date that you currently submit. You retain the control over when that aggregate due date is submitted to Ed. It is due by the due date, but when you actually send it is up to the state. All state unit record, individual staff, individual students, that remains only at the state IT level. What does change, again, we're going to repeat this numerous times. Before you send the file in to us, you already have reviewed the file against the business rules and responded to those business rules, either by submitting, fixing the data if there's a problem with it, or adding a data note. The other big part is we will be adjusting some due dates. Since we're moving forward the business rules to before the due date, we'll be adjusting the due dates back just a little bit. And I want to mainly emphasize that last bullet on that column. The success of this really depends, as Kelly was mentioning, on good data governance. The EDFacts coordinator working with the IDA data manager and whoever else in the state is involved with collecting, maintaining this data. Next slide. So what about the EMAPS surveys? And EMAPS is also the way that we collect the IDA Part C data. So we're going to be moving them to a pre-submission mode. So if you are an IDA Part C person who's working already with submitting that data in the EMAP system, which is what we use to collect the Part C data, it does have all the business rules. It just doesn't force you to respond to them. And for 22-23, again, we're going to move the due dates out a little bit and request that the states address all the business rules that are in the tool before they submit. Next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick timeline of what's going on. I won't read it to you, but again, the gist of this is for both Part B and Part C, instead of submitting the data, waiting a while to get your data quality results, responding to them, and resubmitting the data, you'll submit your data into the system. You'll get some immediate results on your data quality. You'll respond to those results, and then you'll submit the data. And then hopefully you never hear from us again until the next year. Next slide. So we do have a poll question here that's really important about how closely is the EDFacts coordinator and the IDA data manager or everybody else in the IDA Part B and Part C working. Give you a second there. Okay, next slide. So the other piece I want to cover is whether or not this is even a viable way of going about this. Because when people introduce change, the first thing that most people say is this isn't going to work. But this last year, we changed the Common Core of Data files to this system where the states had to clear all the comments before they submitted the data. And we found it did work. We moved out the due date 1 month, and just about every state was able to clear all of their data quality comments, such that by the due date, we had a set of data that we could take to the National Center for Education Statistics group to be published. And that had never happened before. So there are quite a few states where the people who are working on your Common Core of data in previous years would have been spending their summer responding to data quality comments about membership and staffing, and they've actually finished all their work. So if you need help on any particular task, the Common Core of Education staff in your state in several places are completely free now because they've finished up their work. So they're available to help you. Just a little side note, but don't tell them I told you that. Next slide. So what's next? A big part of this is, as Kelly mentioned earlier, is getting the business rules correct, so that the business rules are the ones that help us determine whether or not that data is quality data that reflects the reality in your state, so it can be published and used. So we're planning to open the EDPAS system sometime after January of 2023. It'll be used by all the states for their school year 22-23 data. So from the IDA point of view, the first thing that will be up will be the IDA child count for Part B, which will be through the EDPAS system. And it'll be this pre-submission DQ where you'll get the results right after you submit your file and need to resolve them. But again, for the Part C people, you're submitting your data into our current EMAP system. And just like the Part B, you will have some results of your data quality. And we're asking that you address those data quality results before you hit the submit button. And in this way, by the time we're finished with the due date for both Part B and Part C, we will have data that has either passed the business rules, or we have data notes explaining why a particular business rule failed. And then we can go immediately to use that data to improve our programs. Next slide. Okay, that was it. Can you go back one? Sorry, I forgot one piece there. I want to really emphasize that what we're trying to do here is put the states in the driver's seat. So you decide when you're submitting the file, you arrange to do the data quality. And again, the data quality in both the EMAP system and the this new EDPAS system will be downloadable to an Excel spreadsheet, so you can work on it and then put the results back into those two systems, submit the data. And the more that you're communicating and working on this, then after the due date, you're finished with your child count. And we're going to do the same thing in the fall of not this year, but next year for your year-end files for exiting and discipline and dispute resolution. Okay, so I'm finished now to turn it back over. Oh, yeah.
Yes, hello. Okay. So I think we're going to circle back to that poll and see if we can go ahead and get the responses. So again, the poll question had been, how closely do you work with your EDFacts coordinator on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that you've never worked with your EDFacts coordinator, 5 being you're in frequent and regular communication. And let's see the results. I think I have to, let's see. I'm looking for where to find the results, or maybe somebody's going to put it in the chat on the back end for me. Oh, 5. Okay, great. Excellent. So I hear that 5 is the winner, which is great, which means you're in frequent and regular communication with your EDFacts coordinator. And interestingly enough, 1 is runner up. So be interesting to see the ends on those. So we, for the EDFacts modernization work, it's going to be so very important for data managers to be working with their EDFacts coordinator. And this is Part B. Part B data managers to be working with their EDFacts coordinators to make sure that the data looks as though they anticipate how it should look, and be able to provide those data note responses. So again, I know Kelly mentioned, please let us know how we can better support the collaboration between EDFacts coordinators and the data managers within the states. So we will have more good discussions about that in the future as we move forward with the EDFacts modernization. So let's move on. Yes, thank you. Back to my section, which is now I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about how EDFacts modernization is going to impact the 618 data. I want to say a lot of for those Part C folks out there, a lot of the discussion has been focused around EDPAS and kind of the data that is typically submitted through the EDFacts submission system, or ESS. Please note that the expectations that we're talking about under EDFacts Modernization will be applicable to Part C 618 data submissions as well. So as we move through this, those broad principles, the expectations are applicable to you all as well. And we will discuss that a little bit further in my presentation. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and move on to the next slide. And these are some of those big principles that are applicable, at least 3 of these are applicable to both B and C. So as you heard, there will be no resubmission periods. So the data are, as Kelly said, the goal is for the data to be usable as of that due date. There will be some adjustments to due dates and freeze dates, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, so that it allows time for states to be able to do this pre-submission data quality work. And 1 and 2 apply to both B and C. Number 3 really applies to Part B, which is that there is an increased, actually, part of it applies to C as well. There is an increased importance of the pre-submission data quality work for all 618 data submissions. So that applies to everybody. But then it also applies to all levels. So for Part B folks, that means any of the data, the 618 data or the related data that comes in at the state levels, the LEA level, and the school level as applicable. And then applying to everyone, again, the increased importance of high quality data notes will be another big thing for both Part B and Part C. Previously, we've been able to go back to states and ask for data notes or clarifications on previously submitted explanations, but with no resubmission period, we will not have this opportunity in the future. So we'll need to have all the information by that due date. So now I'll go ahead and dig into these a little bit deeper, and we can move on to the next slide. I just noted this, but I will reiterate that the EDFacts modernization work is applicable to all levels for which you submit 618 data. So again, state, LEA, and school level as applicable. States, again, this means that states will be required to address any failed business rules or business rules that are triggered by the when the data is uploaded, or provide data notes or explanations for the submission in order to submit those data. So it would be the same state level as well as LEA level or school level where applicable. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that. If we move on to the next slide, this diagram provides a visualization of the changes to the data submission process. So as you can see, the data submission and data notes period is longer with the new process, but there is no resubmission period. So that's why this has to do with adjusting the due dates as well. So let's go ahead and take another quick poll. And this one's about the confidence and the quality of your data at the initial due date. So again, this is currently what is your confidence in the data that you're submitting as of the initial due date for 618. This will be very important going forward with EDFacts modernization as there are no resubmission periods. And let's see. Okay, so I see the poll is up now and folks are submitting responses. I think I'm probably going to move forward and then have to circle back. But please keep the responses coming in. If we move on to the next, oh, sorry, that was the poll that's currently being responded to. If we move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. In regards to resubmission periods, what is changing is that there will be none. and that the due dates will, so that means that now the due dates will be the same as the freeze dates. That's a phrase we use, meaning that currently our freeze date is at the end of the resubmission periods. It's when we take a snapshot of the data out of the EDFacts system, and we use that snapshot for our use and publication of the data. So to create our data files, our 618 data products, annual report to Congress, SPP APR, determinations matrix, et cetera, our results matrix for determinations, et cetera. We use the data as of that freeze date. Well, now with no resubmission periods, the freeze date will be the same as the due date. Again, these changes are applicable for the 2022-23 Section 618 data. So that is data that you all start to submit to ED next spring. So it's not that far away, which is why we really wanted to make sure to get in front of you all at this conference and be able to discuss this with you. What is not changing? As we have in the past, OSEP will still expect the data to be of high quality upon that initial due date. We have had a long-standing expectation of this for the 618 data, and that's part of the reason why we use the data quality evaluation of the data submissions as of the due date for the SPP APR data rubrics. So this expectation will not change. But there will be even more of an emphasis on this expectation starting next spring due to the fact that there are no resubmission periods. There's a theme here. I'm sure you all are getting it, but we keep bringing it up because it is a very big change for this work. If we could, let me circle back to the first poll. Maybe before we go to the second poll question, we can go back to the first poll, which again was, what is the confidence in the quality of the 618 data you submit as of the initial due date? And I don't see the results. I can see the poll. So I will wait just a second to see if I can get the results. A lot of confidence won. So excellent. So that means, as I expected, with the 618 data, you folks are in a good place as we move into EDFacts modernization, because that's where we want to see. We want to see high confidence in the data that you submit as of that initial due date, or what will now be the due date. As well as we want to have high confidence in it as well, because as you know, we use these data for high stakes decision making for IDA programs. So, okay, poll number 2. So we're going to go to the second poll question for my section. Which of the following represents your general attitude on the current due dates for Section 618 data? Are the current due dates too early, appropriately timed, too late? So if you guys can all take that poll as I talk a little bit about due dates, and then we'll circle back to it for the results. So if you can move to the next slide. So the submission process, as previously noted, there will be changes to the ways that the 618 data are submitted. To start, as I noted, we'll be adjusting due date, and as Barb noted too, there'll be adjustments to due dates as appropriate for most of the 618 data collections. And so the adjustments are intended to allow states more time to do the pre-submission data quality work, but it also allows OSEP more time to provide technical assistance to states around those 618 data submissions as needed or requested. So another big change is going to be the expectation that the data submitted as of the due date will be used and published. So again, that goes back to that idea of no submission, resubmission periods. What's not changing is that you'll still be submitting the data with EDPass. There might It might be a little bit different, but the data is still being submitted through ESS and EMAPS. You will still receive the reporting instructions via EDFacts file specs for the data submitted or traditionally submitted through ESS, and user guides for those data submitted through EMAPS. So you will still be able to rely on those reporting tools or the reporting instructions you've used in the past in order to submit these data. If we can move on to the next slide. So as we noted, right, we're going to try to adjust due dates. And so we're currently playing with a set of proposed due dates. So please understand, these are proposed. They are not final. We just tried to think about and put together where we thought potentially would be a good place to have these due dates, thinking that in most cases we need to give states more time for the pre-submission work. But we still need to be able to have the data ready for use for all of our purposes. So beginning, so again, this would be beginning with the 2023 data. We are looking at potentially moving child count at environments to a mid-May due date from April. What we would traditionally call like the November data collection, so personnel exiting and discipline for Part B, moving them to a late February due date. I'll circle back to dispute resolution and assessment. MOE CIS, moving that to a late June due date. Now for dispute resolution, due to its use in the SPPA PR, we were proposing not changing that due date. Now, again, as you can see on the first bullet above the chart, it says, if you have feedback on these due dates, please submit it to the Partner Support Center. So I'm very interested in that dispute resolution piece. Is there a need to still push back the due date for that data collection? As you can see for assessment, we have to be determined, and this is due to the fact that we are co-data stewards of these data with OESC, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education and Ed. And so we need to coordinate with them around when the due date, if the due date will move and when will it move to. So we have started those conversations, but we are still, it's still in process right now to figure out exactly when that will move. So obviously there will be more information on this as things are finalized. But again, I would ask that you please, if you have feedback on this, to please send it to the Partner Support Center via their email, which is also in that slide. If we move on to the next slide. These are the Part C proposed, again, proposed due dates, moving, and they very much still align with the Part B. So Part C child count and settings, moving it to a mid-May due date, Part C exiting, moving it to a late February, and then not moving dispute resolution. So again, we are looking for feedback on whether these seem appropriate and doable. Are you going to have high quality data and data notes are you going to be able to submit high quality 618 data and data notes by these new dates? And the email for Partner Support Center is right there at the top of the slide for you all to send feedback. Let's see. Can I quickly see if we might have results to the poll regarding due dates? Are people feeling that due dates fit our data quality review process schedule perfectly? Okay, well, I don't know. They currently fit it perfectly. So again, if adjusting these due dates is not going to work, then please let us know. That's the kind of feedback we need to hear. Yes, please let us know, because we'll need to figure out how, and we'll continue this discussion. This is not the last time you'll hear this or see this, but certainly send in your feedback regarding this. Okay, so quickly, freeze dates. We talked about freeze dates a little bit before. Again, this is when we take a snapshot of the data for use in publication, the 618 data for use in publication. And again, this is applicable to Part B and Part C, as most of these slides are. And so we have traditionally done freeze dates in spring and summer, which are at the ends of the resubmission periods. Since we will no longer have resubmission periods, that means the freeze dates are now the same as the due date. So if you go, actually it's 2 slides now, sorry. Yeah, okay. So you will see here in this chart that we're comparing when the freeze dates have been to when the freeze dates are proposed due to that list of proposed due dates. You'll notice that the due date and the freeze date, proposed due date and freeze date, are the same. So it would mean moving forward those freeze dates because they're now the same as the due date, the proposed due dates. Again, if there are feedback or questions, please submit them through PSC. Regarding feedback on this, please submit through PSC. Part C, if you go on to the next slide, it shows the same information. Part C, child count and settings, instead of having a freeze date in mid-May, it would, in July, it would be moved to mid-May. Instead of end of May, it would be moved to February. Dispute resolution is, again, that one that we definitely want feedback on, because that would be November, which is very different than the end of May, which is when the old freeze date was. Moving on to the next one. Next poll has to do with what is your familiarity with the Business Rules Single Inventory, or BRSI. And so I think that'll be, I think that was just posted. If you all can take a minute to respond to that poll, and then and so I put poll questions back to back here. So we might have to take a minute. We've got a few we've got a good number of responses. So maybe we can close the one poll about the BRSI, the Business Rules Single Inventory. Please note that that includes both information for Part B and Part C in that inventory. And we can move on to the next slide and the next poll. Do you or your office review the IDA Section 618 data files prior to them being submitted to EDFacts? And while you're responding to that, I'll start. I just got the results in from the BRSI on the BRSI question, and the winner was, I don't know what the BRSI is. So that helps us understand what we need to do some additional trainings on, right? And help you all understand what the information that's in there, because those are really our edits, right? So those are going to be the edits, the data quality checks that we currently run after the due date that we use to develop our data quality inquiries and our data quality reports. And those are what are now going to be run on the front end, for the most part, on the front end of the submission process under EDFacts Modernization. Okay, our other poll regarding reviewing the data before it was submitted, it looks like we have quite a few responses. And so if we could close that poll. So yes, so that's great. It's excellent to hear that program offices are reviewing those data before they're being, and 100%. That's wonderful. So again, It's great to hear that because, again, it's going to be so important under EDFacts modernization that you've reviewed the data, you agree with the data that's being submitted, and that you're being able to provide those explanations if any of the edits, business rules are triggered, since that will be needed before submission. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So both using the business rule single inventory and making sure your office has the ability to review the data, as I noted, is going to be super important under EDFacts modernization. Again, two of the biggest differences is that the data submitted through EDFacts will need to either meet the edit checks or have a data note explaining why it did not meet that edit check in order to submit. And that's for the due date, submission for the due date. And the data notes provided will need to be, by the due date, will need to be comprehensive enough for OSEP to understand the data that's being submitted to EDFacts. So, please note the majority of data notes that are provided are also used by external data users when we publish the data. So we do publish out the data notes, the majority of the data notes, when we publish our 618 data. So that's always something to keep in mind when you are drafting the data notes. So what will not be changing regarding the pre-submission data quality work? We'll still be evaluating based on timeliness, completeness, and passing edit checks. And as I noted, we'll still be using that BRSI, the business rule single inventory. So again, that's a resource for you all to use to see what edits will be run or checked, your data will be checked against. And we'll do some follow-up on that in the upcoming months. Moving on to the next slide. With EDFacts modernization, there will be an expectation that OSEP will be able to use the 618 data as of the due date. So this has been mentioned before, but it means that you will not have the opportunity, we will not have the opportunity to ask data quality inquiries or ask for additional explanations prior to use in publication. So just trying to express the importance and significance of getting in comprehensive data notes and high quality data by the due date. In order to assist states with submitting the data and the data notes ready for publication as of the due date, OSEP will engage with states around data quality questions and challenges prior to that due date. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, so we can go ahead and move on. We are still developing a plan for providing pre-submission technical assistance around data quality and data notes for the uploaded and submitted that are uploaded and submitted to EDFacts. Based on lessons learned from the CCD pilot, we are anticipating that the RTP data staff will be providing state support for probably 4 to 6 weeks out from the due date, and that states can request discussions with us regarding their data, as well as states can ask questions or escalate concerns to us via Partner Support Center, which has been our typical process anyway. So that will continue. We are hoping to provide some scheduled office hours with RTP data team staff, reminders regarding the new process, as well as expectations and due dates. And then if requested, individualized support to states regarding those data submissions. Again, this is all pre-submission technical assistance, right? So before the due date. Moving on to the next one, I have another poll. Do you submit data notes prior to the initial due date of the 618 data submissions? And so it is posted. Responses are just yes or no. So I know that there are some 618 data collections for which this is more common to submit data notes by the initial due date, such as in like the MOE CIS data collection. But think about the majority of the data collections when you're answering it. Do you typically, for a 618 data submission, submit data notes upon that due date, that initial due date. I see answers are slowly coming in. So in the meantime, I will go on and talk a little bit about data notes, and then we'll circle back to the responses. So if you could go to the next slide. So it looks like possibly my slide, didn't update. So I apologize for that. But another big change with modernization is that the states will need to provide the data notes at the time of submission and by the due date. As I noted, the data notes will be required for any edit check that is not resolved by resubmitting the data. So we do expect that data notes to be submitted as of the due date will fully explain any anomalies seen in the data. So there are some that pop out right away that are probably fairly easy to respond to, like if you have a third gender reporting, if you within your state use a third gender reporting category and we don't have a permitted value for that, when we add up male plus female, it doesn't equal the total. That will trigger an edit, right, as it does currently. And you would need to provide a data note for that, and to make sure that you are providing a data note that provides us the information that you have a third reporting category, so that we understand what's going on with your data and why it triggered the edit. What will not be changing is OSEP's reliance on the data note to understand the 618 data submitted by a state, and our practice of publishing those state submitted data notes with the 618 data files. Okay, just quickly, if we go to the next slide, and then I'll circle back to the poll. These are all resources for writing good data notes. So we've got one from the Partner Support Center and EDFacts. We have one that's actually from Cypher, and one that's from IDC. So these are important resources to check out when you're thinking about writing comprehensive data notes, which again will be very important under this EDFacts modernization. I believe all of these links are in the handouts. Quickly, I did want to note that unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, we were not able to have an MSIP representative on this panel. However, Christine Pilgrim from MSIP, who does a lot of their data work, has been involved in our discussions around EDFacts modernization. She has very much kept us in tune to the impact on the SBP APR and determinations work. So please be assured that we are considering that as we are working through all of these different pieces, like the due dates and various uses of the data. So I did want to mention that. Also, regarding timeline, since this is the 22-23 data submitted under, will be submitted under EDFacts modernization, that will impact the SBP APR due February 1 of 2024. So not next year's APR, but then the one after that. So, we do have some time, not a lot of time, but we do have some time. But we are working through that. And MSIP is at the table for those discussions. Okay, quickly circling back to the poll that we had regarding data notes and submitting data notes by the due date, and the majority was no, that folks are not. So this will be a change, right? Getting those data notes in by the due date. It will be very clear what you need to provide data notes on due to the EdPass system, or in EMAPS, the edits that are triggered through the EMAPS system. But again, it will that'll be a change, needing to get those data notes in by the due date. Okay, well, with that, we can move on to the next slide. As we have noted, the EDFacts modernization is really about getting data that we can publish and use in earlier, and reducing the burden of the back and forth between ed and states following the initial due date of those data. So we I do believe that OSEP and the IDA state folks are in a good place for this change. We have a solid foundation of data quality work that supports this transition and a large standing expectations that align closely with the new goals and processes of the EDFacts modernization. I know that states have received technical assistance from various groups, but some of the most prominent are our OSEP-funded National Data Technical Assistance Centers. And for today's panel, we have 3 of those centers here to discuss, or videos from 3 of the centers, here to discuss the products and tools that they have available to assist states with the transition to these new expectations under EDFacts modernization. So the first center is going to be the IDA Data Center, or IDC. And before we do that, we will do a quick poll, and then afterwards we'll come back to the responses. So I'll just put this up, and if folks could answer it, in the next few minutes, and we'll circle back to responses afterwards. But in which of the following data collections have you had the most data quality challenges? So I believe the poll will be live in a minute. Yep, there we go. I believe it's live. And then we can go to the next slide, which is really just the poll question. And then I think we can go ahead and start the video from IDC on some of the tools and products that they have available to assist states with this transition.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Wilkinson, and I'm a technical assistance provider for the IDEA Data Center, or IDC. We wanted to share a little bit about our center, as well as some tools that are currently available to assist with data quality and upcoming changes related to modernization. IDC is a grant funded by the Office of Special Education Programs and focuses on building state capacity around IDEA Part B data. This includes data like the Section 618 data collections, the State Performance Plan and Annual Performance Report, and significant disproportionality. Our support relates to data collection, reporting, analysis, and the use of IDEA Part B data. As a technical assistance center, we have a large team of experienced staff that provides support around IDEA Part B data. We provide 3 categories of technical assistance, or TA. Targeted TA encompasses assigned IDC state liaisons who serve as the direct point of contact to answer any questions you might have, as well as various peer groups like the Data Quality Peer Learning Groups, peer-to-peer exchanges, the New Data Manager Connection, Data Manager Summits, and the Hands-On Learning Academy. Intensive TA is even further tailored to specific states and includes the co-development of state-specific TA plans to holistically support states in their areas of need. Universal TA broadly encompasses things like our state-of-the-art website with events, a resource library, TA page, and news items. This TA also includes various communications, such as the A Date with Data podcast, the IDC Voice newsletter, blogs, news blasts, and other social media outreach. In addition to our direct technical assistance, IDC offers an array of tools, products, and resources to states, which are focused on ways to ensure data are high quality, accurate, and usable. These resources include things like interactive infographics, various Excel workbooks, toolkits, data collection calendars, and checklists. Some of these tools and products are particularly valuable to verify data quality for Part B data, like the Section 618 data collections. The tool I want to highlight briefly today is IDC's SEA and LEA edit, check, and data display tools. We provide SEA level tools for all of the Section 618 files listed below, as well as LEA level tools for several of these collections. The edit, check, and data display tools identify possible business rule errors or issues with totals and subtotals prior to submitting the Section 618 data collections to increase the accuracy of the information and limit data quality checks or findings during the data quality review process. You can find these tools on our IDC website at the following link. I've pulled one of the tools for the state level school age child count and educational environments data collection to quickly walk through what they offer. You can see that we start on the README tab. This is where you can find information and instructions on using this tool. If we go to the FS002 tab, we can copy and paste our EDFacts file for this particular collection and see if there are any issues. So now that this information's been placed in this tab, I can click on the Check Data Format button. Nothing appears on the screen, which indicates that the file is correct and accurate. But let's say I change something. Instead of reporting 2,720 records, I accidentally report 2,520 records. When I do that and click this Check Data Format button, you can see I get a pop-up that says the total records in the file count in the file header does not match the number of rows in the file. Let's do another example. Under the racial and ethnic category, let's say instead of reporting AM7, I input X accidentally. When I do that, and again, click the Check Data Format button, you can see that it reports there's one missing data element and that I can review column Z for more details. If I scroll over here to column Z, you can see that there are listed missing data elements related to that racial and ethnic category of AM7. If I want additional information about these errors, I can go to the Error Messages tab, which has the cells where the errors are occurring and hyperlinks to them for more information. Finally, this tool has different tabs that include data displays or charts with information about the counts of students or the percentage of students reported for different categories within this data collection. Sometimes it's reported independently, and some of the data is reported as the category sets used in the file to identify any issues, such as those marked in red. And this information can also be valuable to share with your stakeholders to more easily access the information. While these tools are incredibly helpful for checking the data sets for formatting and totaling issues, IDC recognizes that additional resources might be necessary to more broadly support modernization efforts, such as identifying linkages between the Section 618 data collections and the information reported in other files or metadata surveys, such as the IDEA State Supplemental Survey. During the department's data quality review process, the department considers more in-depth data quality checks using the Business Rules Single Inventory, or BRSI, which cross-references data submitted across other submissions or surveys. One tool we are in the beginning stages of considering is one where states can input their responses to their IDEA State Supplemental Survey, which will then display relevant data quality checks that should be considered in the Section 618 data collections prior to submitting the data. For example, if a state reports in the State Supplemental Survey that a student must be at least 18 years old to graduate with a regular high school diploma, the tool would generate a reminder to check the ages of students reported with this exit reason, as no counts would be expected for students aged less than 18 in the exit category of graduated with a regular high school diploma. This tool would provide states the opportunity to quickly reference the different implications that selections in the State Supplemental Survey might have on Section 618 data collections. We will be reaching out to states to get additional feedback on how IDC can best support them with modernization in the coming months, and we look forward to getting your input and feedback on this work. We always want to ensure we are responsive to the needs of the field. This is a direct link to the tool that we walked through today, and you'll find files for other Section 618 data collections on this page for both SEA and LEA level files. Thank you so much for your time, and please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns you might have.
So thank you, Rachel and IDC, for putting together that video. I do want to circle back to the poll that we did regarding which data collections were there the most data quality challenges. So assessment, child count, ed environments, and then MOE CIS were the top 3 in that order. And so that's good information for both IDC to have, as well as us at OSEP and EDFacts, so we can go back and think about how do we better support for those specific data collections as we move forward with this EDFacts modernization. So coming up next, we've got a video from the Center for the Integration of IDA Data, or CID. They've done a lot of work around supporting discussions, collaborations, and coordination among state data managers, the statewide longitudinal data system managers, and EDFacts coordinators. And that work, as well as the work that they've done around their Generate tool, can only help strengthen states' readiness as we make this transition. I do want to make a note that these are Part B focused centers. And so these are Part B focused resources. However, we will have one for Part C after this video. So please stay tuned. Okay, with that, I'll pass it off to, I think, Bill in IDC's video. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a poll. I shouldn't do that yet. I'm rushing myself here. One more poll. To meet EDFacts modernization objectives of having high quality data that is complete and passes edit checks at the file submission deadline, how many weeks before the due date do you estimate you will need to begin validation and data quality processes? Again, please respond, and the poll is live. Please go ahead and respond as we are listening to the video.
Hello. This is Bill Hennikins with the Center for Integration of IDA Data. I'm excited to be here with you to talk about EDFacts modernization and the supports that the center can provide to your state education agency. First, a little bit about CID. We are an OSEP-funded data center. We support states with the integration of their Part B 616, 618 data and statewide longitudinal data systems. We provide direct technical assistance to states to improve their data integration efforts and ultimately efficient and effective EDFacts reporting. To do this, we focus on people, processes, and systems. People, their different roles, responsibilities are critical to data integration efforts and will be critical to the EDFacts modernization process. Looking at movement of data and the connection of people over the data is also critical to data integration efforts. CID supports states with effective and efficient processes in the EDFacts reporting and data integration efforts. Systems that move the data, aggregate the data, and ultimately produce the files that are uploaded to the EDFacts system are critical to integration efforts and the EDFacts modernization process. CID will help you across the people, processes, and systems develop effective and efficient EDFacts reporting and data integration efforts. Let's dive into what CID is certainly popular and known for, the Generate Automated EDFacts Reporting Tool. Currently, there are 20 states in some phase of implementation process, from states that have for several cycles now used Generate to produce their IDA EDFacts reports to states that are just now beginning the process of implementation. There are numerous benefits to the Generate application. Let's talk about 2 different components of the benefits. First are aspects of the tool itself. It is important to note that with Generate, you will have a human readable table with headers and column names of every single EDFacts category set, summary total for each and every EDFacts file that you use Generate to develop. This will help you with the validation, data quality work that data stewards need to do in order to ensure efficient and timely reporting of their EDFacts files, and that as you report the data, it is done quality and accurately the very first time you submit it to the EDFacts solution. The process of implementing Generate is also important. The process will require you to go through your business rules, the exact way that you're doing EDFacts reporting so that you can ensure as you load your custom data into Generate and the CDS structures that underlie Generate, you are doing it the right way to produce the reports that you expect. In doing this, you'll go through the different aspects of your reporting and most likely catch things that you did 5 to 10 years ago that are impacting the quality of your data today. Simply the process of implementing Generate will improve your data quality and provide you with an efficient, effective tool to meet the goals and objectives of EDFacts modernization, reporting timely and quality data at the time of submission. Target technical assistance is another area that SID provides support. We provide individualized short-term support, workshops, convenings, communities of practice. The use of CEDS tools align and connect that can be valuable resources for doing your EDFacts work. We also organize user groups for SEAs implementing Generate through the Generate Governance Group, or G3, so that they can support each other, be effective in their use of Generate, and move the process and the application forward so it's the best tool that it can be for states. Universal technical assistance, or technical assistance that you can get at the time you are ready without any necessarily engagement with SID staff, is also another important resource that SID provides. The most significant aspect or resource that we have is the Data Integration Toolkit. It's this roadmap of steps and tasks to help you do data integration and to be ready for EDFacts modernization. It's a sequential set of processes for integrating data. You can use out of it what best fits for your specific state. There are activities, checklists, templates, sample processes, lots of different resources, all collected together in one toolkit that we have over the last 18 months, refreshed and reformulated for the Generate work and for your integration efforts to ensure that as you go through the EDFacts modernization process, you are best organized to meet the objectives. We also have a number of webinars that are certainly relevant to the EDFacts modernization effort. The first is how strong data governance improves data quality and data integration. Certainly, as you do EDFacts modernization work, focusing on data governance, ensuring that those who have the right authority are making the right decisions over data quality and data governance issues is important. This webinar will help you do that. Second, want to learn more about Generate? We have a Generate, a first-person perspective. It's an overview of the user interface with Generate and how you can engage with the application and learn more about it. Next, we have a webinar, Voices from the States, using Generate to prepare EDFacts files. This has examples from state education agency staff. So learn from your colleagues about how they are using Generate. It's important to not just hear from us on SID, but your colleagues on how they have found Generate to be valuable in their processes and systems. So you can see SID has a number of resources, a number of ways to engage, and ultimately with Generate, an immensely valuable tool to help you meet the expectations of EDFacts modernization. Want to learn more? Visit our website or contact me directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill and Sid, for that video. I do want to circle back to the responses we received to the poll about when does the data validation work need to start. Thinking about, having high quality data submitted as of the due date. The winner was 4 to 6 weeks prior to the due date. But was close follow-up was the 4 to 6 weeks. So that helps us gauge when we should start engaging with states around the pre-submission technical assistance work. So thank you very much for those responses. So our final video is from our Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems, or DAISY, who will support the Part C programs with the transition to the new expectations under EDFacts Modernization. As a reminder, the Part C data comes in through the EMAP system, so that will continue. But the expectations, the no resubmission periods, using the data as of that initial due date, adjusting due dates, that all will be applicable to the Part C 618 data. So here is DAISY with some tools and products that will support their Part C transitions to this work.
Hi, I'm Robin Nelson with the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems, known as the DAISY Center. Let me begin by saying that we're working on the premise that the biggest impact of EDFacts modernization on Part C reporting through EMAPs will be states understanding the changing expectations of the process, so that they can then monitor and change their own processes to meet those expectations of submitting quality data by passing the edit checks independently and writing good data notes. DAISY has a number of resources to support states in this effort, some in development and some that currently exist but are in need of minor revision. One resource will be a set of edit check and display tools for each of the 618 data collections: child count and settings, exiting, and dispute resolution. These Excel files will incorporate all of the EMAP's business rules in order to identify potential computational and/or formatting errors. They will provide validation checks, warnings, and error messages, as well as assist states in displaying the data both in table format and graphically. Here's a very simple example of the first sheet you would see in such a file. This would be for entering data for the A1 submission. You would see another sheet that actually displays the data, and then another sheet that identifies and explains any of the warnings or error messages. Another resource is the Part C Data Processes Toolkit. This resource was developed to help states examine, develop, and document any processes involved in the collection, analysis, and reporting of data. There are separate templates for each of the 618 data collections and each of the APR indicators. Each template delineates a number of processes, asks more information about how that process is conducted and by whom, and allows states to respond within the template itself. The templates are in standard format, but can be customized to meet the individual needs of the state. Here you see on the left in the bullets a sample of some of the data processes that are included in the template, from data collection and data quality efforts to public reporting of those data. And then you'll see to the right a screenshot of part of the toolkit with two of those processes, collection and data quality, having text that further identifies the process and probes and asks questions about how those processes are conducted and by whom. EDFacts modernization will require some minor modifications to these processes and will render some of the processes moot. For example, the response to the OSEP data quality report. So we will make those appropriate changes to the toolkit. Another resource is our Part C data notes brief. This data notes brief describes the purpose of Part C data notes, explains how they are used by OSEP in their data quality reviews, and provides tips and best practices. Again, you can see that some of this will need a revision, for example, actually deleting the description of OSEP and their data quality review process. So again, minor modifications to this resource. And lastly, we will develop a checklist that will help states transition to the new processes for resulting from EDFacts modernization. This will be a checklist that delineates the steps and activities that are needed as states transition to the new processes. It will be a time-limited resource in the sense that it will be particularly pertinent in the first year or so as states transition to the new processes. It essentially will help with planning, making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It will essentially be a very simplified self-assessment checklist. So these are the resources. Those in blue with the hyperlink are those that currently exist. When they are revised, they will be at the same location on the website. They will replace earlier versions of these resources. And then we will be working to develop the edit check files as well as the checklist, and working in collaboration with a small group of Part C data managers to not only develop but test those resources as well. So the DAISY Center looks forward to supporting states in this effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Robin and Daisy, for that information. We are really close to the end of our session. I know there have been a number of questions that have come in. So I am going to ask, I think there were a bunch that Barbara might have wanted to address. So I'm going to ask if she would like to provide some responses quickly before we wrap up.
Okay, some of the questions were about what system people are going to be interacting with. If you're an IDA Part B manager, you're going to be interacting with our new system, EDFacts. It'll have a different website than what you've seen before. For the people in Part C, you're going to continue to work on the EMAPS system. And there was also some questions about due dates. The due dates for the next school year have not been set yet. We've given you the proposals. You can send us some comments to the PSC, and please explain, it's not just a, no, you don't like that due date, but explain what due date is needed and why it's needed so that we can make a very informed decision. The other piece I want to bring up with the technical assistance centers by your side, with your already good data governance and your solid ways of running the data, we have no reason, or how do I word this? We are 100% confident that you guys are all going to be able to make these due dates. And again, the prize to you is starting in April or next spring, you're going to be finished with your IDA data counts, and you'll never hear from us again about that school year and those counts. So turn it back over to Meredith.
Okay, thank you.
Can I answer one question? One of the questions was about the catastrophic fail and what happens if we can't get any data in by the due date. We do have a backup plan that if you have something like a catastrophic fail, that you can submit a note to PSC, let us know that what happened. We will send that information to your program office, to OSEP, and then we will find a way for you to submit that data after the due date. We expect this to be the exception rather than the rule, and but we will have a backup in the event of an emergency kind of situation.
Thank you, Kelly and Barb. So I do want to say this is the first of these discussions. This is not the end of the conversation. There will be more to discuss, obviously. So please submit the questions, the feedback on the due dates through the Partner Support Center. Questions that were not addressed that came in through this, we will take back, and we will get responses out to you all, clarifications. And I just want to thank everybody for participating in today's session. Kelly and Barbara, thank you so much for joining me in the presentation. The three centers, IDC, SID, and DAISY, thank you for putting together your videos and supporting the states in the submissions. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.